There are three ways that transactions are posted into the SunPlus database. They are system-generated postings, ledger import, and ledger entry. In this video, we are going to be focusing on ledger entry. So let's go into ledger entry now and work our way through the process. This is one of several ledger entry form designs. If the form that you open looks different, that's okay. Designs vary by whether the organization is single currency or multi-currency. They also vary by the software application version that was being used at the time that they were created. Regardless of how the ledger entry screen looks, the fields that you're going to be filling in are always the same. We always begin with the journal type. Journal types are not new to accountants. SunPlus, however, uses journal types in a slightly different way from traditional accounting, but that will not become an issue until filing time, which we'll cover later on. If you know the code for the journal type that you want to use for this particular transaction posting, you can go ahead and type it in. If you don't know the code, you can click on the Assist button to get access to a list of all of the various types of journals that have been set up in your system. From this list, you can select the type that you need. For our example, we're going to use the Cash Check Receipt Journal, and the code for that is CR. Let's take a quick look at the screen now that we've entered this journal type. Certain information pops up that wasn't there before, including the name of the business unit that you are working in, which is displayed directly above the journal type field. To the right of the journal type field is the name of the type of journal that we selected for this particular entry. Notice at this point there's only one field on the screen that has a white background. In Sun Systems, we can only work in fields whose backgrounds are either white or occasionally yellow. We'll talk more about yellow fields later. Once we have populated the journal type field, we need to click on the OK button to release the next field we need to populate. A new field now has a white background. We need to enter an external or transaction reference before we do anything else. The value that you enter into the external transaction reference field should be something that is meaningful. Preferably, it should be some kind of data that will easily tie this transaction to the originating documents. This is intended to help you file and understand transactions at a later point. The value that you enter here can be a number, such as an invoice or receipt or note number, or a description appearing on the originating document. If that type of data is not available, enter any data you think would be meaningful. Many organizations set up a policy for the kind of information that they use as a transaction reference. I will enter a number at random for my demonstration since I do not have an originating document. Since that is the only field with a white background, once again I will need to click OK in order to open the next field. When I click OK, the value that I entered as the transaction reference will be saved, and I can move on to the next field. Notice that we now have a number of fields with white backgrounds. We can work in each of those fields. Notice also there is a new piece of text across the top. It's located directly under the title of the journal type. In this particular journal type, this text is Cash Check Receipting. Basically, this is a reminder of the type of activity that is expected for this particular transaction line in this type of journal. So that information will change with the journal line and the journal type. Our cursor is currently located in the Accounting Period field. Notice that there is a default period value that is already shown in the field. This default is based on the current accounting period for the business unit. Notice down here in the very bottom right-hand corner of the screen, the current financials period for this business unit is August of 2013. If this is the accounting period into which you want to post this transaction, you can simply press the Tab key to accept that value and move on to the next field. If not, you can type in the period that you need. The Tab key will be the keyboard shortcut for moving your cursor into the next field. Our next field in this particular journal type is the transaction date. This field is already defaulted to the current operating system date, and again we can look down in the lower right hand corner of the screen and see the same date, but it is the login date of the operating system. You can override this value if necessary. You can simply delete to erase the value. You can type in the new value, or you can click on the drop-down button to access a cute little calendar from which you can select the appropriate date by double-clicking. When we press the Tab key again, our cursor should advance to the account code field, and in fact that is what it did. Notice that again there is a default value already populated in the field. You may be wondering why and how we came by that value. All of the defaulted values on this screen are set up in the journal type setup function, and we will cover that in a different video. For now, it is enough to say that for a cash check receipt journal, we can predict that most cash check receipt entries are posted into the cash receipt account. The account code for that account in the system is 101150, so we have defaulted that value. We can override that value if we need a different account, or we can simply press the Tab key to accept that value and move our cursor into the next open field. Notice that across the top of the ledger entry screen and down the side on the left, there are a number of fields. The labels for these fields are clearly the analysis dimension labels. This is where you need to enter the analysis code for this particular transaction. If you're using a different ledger entry screen than this one, the way those fields are displayed or laid out may be slightly different. It doesn't really matter what the layout is. They work in exactly the same way. You'll notice that for this particular screen, we only have one analysis dimension field with a white background. So there's only one analysis dimension field into which you can put a value. It may seem that analysis dimension code requirements are sort of random, because sometimes a transaction will require 3 or 4 analysis codes, while at other times they'll only require 1, like in this case. Let's take a minute to talk about that. Analysis dimension code requirements actually are not triggered randomly at all. They are determined by the way the natural account code is set up. When you set up a natural account, you assign what we call MOP settings. These are the analysis dimension requirements for postings to that account. And when we go to the video for chart of account setup, we will discuss how to decide which MOP settings are necessary for a particular account. So when you select the account code for the transaction entry, that is what determines what analysis code you're going to need to attach to this particular line of the transaction. So for this account, we only need one analysis code, and that is the fund. Because developers know that postings to this particular account, cash receipts, are nearly always going to need to be posted into the operating fund. So we have pre-populated the journal type for cash check receipt journal to require the operating fund code to be entered on the first line of the transaction, the debit line. Because the operating fund code is already defaulted for line 1 of this particular transaction entry, we can simply click the Tab key to move to the next field. For the debit line of the cash receipt entries, we find that we have a lot of pre-populated values. This is because the debit line for this kind of entry is so easy to predict. Just about every time you want to post this kind of transaction, it's going to go into these certain fields and require certain kinds of analysis. The value that we find in the description field is different from the pre-populated values that we found in the field so far. And that is because, unlike the other defaults on this screen, we're always going to want to change this one. The description default value for this particular journal type is not ever supposed to remain as part of the transaction. This is intended to be a reminder of the type of data that you need to enter on the debit line of cash check receipt journals. The only thing that we want you to enter into the description field is the name of the person who is paying the money. And that is because whatever value you enter into the description field is going to be used in the received from line of your cash receipt. So you want it to say the person's name and nothing else. So for our example, let's assume that I was the person who paid the money. So we will enter my name into the description field. I'm going to type in Jana Lee Shaw. And that's all I want there. And I'm going to click the Tab key once again. And now we have arrived at the amount field. Let's say that I donated $5,000. So I'm going to type in 5,000 and I'm going to click Tab once again. Notice that the debit credit field has also been pre-populated to debit. So really, when you look at this particular line of the cash receipt journal, there are only two values that you need to enter, and that is the description and the amount, because all of the other fields have been defaulted to their probable values. You can change those and overwrite them if you need to, but you really don't have to. So the entry of cash receipt transactions can go very rapidly. Once I've entered the debit credit value, or accepted the debit that's pre-populated, I can move on to the next line. I could click the New Line button to access the second line of this transaction. But let's look at a couple things first. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, we have line 1, and this tells you where we are within the journal. That is not an important piece of information on line 1, but if you've entered a number of lines, it could become confusing, so that piece of information might be very important for you. Other fields that we didn't use for this particular journal type, but we might need for other journal types, include the memo amount, which is a non-financial value, such as a quantity, and the allocation marker. We don't need those for cash receipts, but you might for another type of journal. We also have address fields into which we could enter a one-off address code if we needed it for the transaction. There's also a due date field, which we do not need for cash receipt journal, so we can leave that blank. At this point, if I click OK, a couple of things are going to happen. Notice that the value that I entered into the description field is now displayed in the Received From line. Also, let's go up to the top right-hand corner of the screen. Here we have some very important pieces of information. This shows that for this particular journal, 5,000 debits have been entered, and no credits have been entered at this point. This also tells me that this journal, if I tried to post it right at the moment, would be out of balance by $5,000. Another thing that happened when I clicked the OK button was that all of these other fields opened up. Suddenly we have a lot of fields with white background. But that does not mean that you need to enter any values into them. Listen carefully, because this can be confusing to new system users. You do not need to enter values into these fields at this time after clicking the OK button. The only fields that needed to be populated were those that were available before we clicked the OK button. What OK does is gives you a chance to see where you're standing in the journal and whether or not you can go ahead and post. So at this point, I'm going to click the New Line button. We are now ready for line 2, as it indicates in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. For every line after the first line of the cash check receipt journal, there are fewer defaulted values. And that is because while the debit line of a cash receipt journal can be predicted, the credit line can vary considerably. So you will need to enter more values into all lines after the first one. First, we will need to enter an account code. If I know the account code, I can go ahead and type it in. And after I have been using the new chart of accounts for a while, I will have some codes memorized, and I can simply enter them, which is a very fast way of doing it. Or I can click on the Assist button and access the chart of accounts for the business unit. Now, this is a long chart of accounts. There are lots and lots of accounts in this. And trying to find a certain account might be kind of a pain. So we have a shortcut that you can use to go more rapidly to the account that you need. If you enter the first character of the account code, then you will go to the first instance in the chart of account listing where that is the first character of the account code. I know that I'm going to want an income account, so I'm going to enter the number 6, and then I'm going to click the Assist button. And here I am in the chart of accounts listing at the first account code that has 6 as the first character. And I'm going to select the donated income account. I can select an account by clicking anywhere in the row in which it is listed, and then I will click OK. Notice that when I selected that account, some of the analysis dimension fields became grayed out, and the Fund 10 was defaulted. So I'm going to tab to accept Fund 10, and notice that a convenient label appears when I accept the value in a field to tell us what the code represents, to help us make sure that we have selected the appropriate code. Now I need to enter a function code. So I'm going to click the Assist button, and from this list of available function codes, I'm going to select the one that I need. And I'm going to select Personal Ministry as my function. So this donation is going to the Personal Ministry department, and I'm going to click OK. The next analysis that I'm going to be required to enter is the restriction. And I'm going to enter a restriction 01, unrestricted, unallocated, non-type. And I'm going to go on to the project code. Now, if there's a project for which this donation was specified, I can enter that project code in this area. But since this particular donation did not come with any specified project, I'm going to select the Not to be Analyzed code. Use the Not to be Analyzed code very carefully, because the analysis code gives us very powerful information, and we want to be as specific as possible as often as we possibly can. My cursor has now been taken into the description field. Because this is line 2, I no longer need to have my name as the description, unless that's what I want it to be. I can enter whatever I want here. Whatever value that I enter needs to be meaningful in the statement of accounts for the donated income account. So I could say, let's say I'm going to say Shaw, and then a general donation. You should keep in mind that the description field only accepts values up to 50 characters in length. So whatever information that you enter into there needs to be kept brief. I'm going to press the Tab key and be taken to the Amount field. Now here I can type in 5,000, or I can use the F3 key to simply duplicate the last value that was entered into the Amount field in line 1. I will click Tab again, and I will be taken to the Debit Credit field. Here I can enter a C, and that will call up the credit. At this point, I can click New Line to add a third line to my journal. I could click New Reference to begin an entirely new journal, a new reference within this journal, or I could post. But first I'm going to click OK and show you what happens. Once again, all of the fields have now opened up, but also the credit line has been registered in our display on the top part of the screen. So now I know that my journal is in balance, and I can click Post. Notice in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen some information shows up. This information keeps you posted on where you are in the process of working on this particular ledger entry. At this point, the journal number 327 has been posted, and it has been assigned a cash receipt number of 10. This icon that shows up on the status bar shows up when the system is compiling a report. The way ledger entry has been set up in SunPlus systems is to automatically produce the journal listing upon the posting of the journal. So you don't have to take a separate step in order to get the journal listing. It will simply pop up as soon as it is compiled. And here you can see all of the information that we entered into the journal. This journal listing also has a barcode. You can use it with the Scan Documents feature of SunPlus. At this point, you can print this journal listing out and attach it to your originating documents. And you would then file this journal not by journal type, but by journal number 327. In the SunPlus filing system, you might have a cash receipt, and then the next journal in the file might be an invoice journal type, and then the next one could be a cash receipt, and then the next one could be regular JV. So journal type becomes irrelevant in SunPlus as a filing reference. Instead, all journals are filed sequentially by journal number. Also be aware that if more than one person is posting journals in your office, if you post a journal and then the next person posts a journal before you post yet again, there's going to be a gap between your two journal numbers for your postings. because all of the journals in the office will simply be taking the next logical number in the filing reference. We can close the journal listing without printing it because that journal listing will be always available within the system. So you can print it out at any time that you are ready to do so. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there are a couple of other buttons. One is Print Receipt and the other is Print the Deposit Summary. If I click on the Print Receipt button, then I can print a receipt for this particular cash receipt journal that I've posted. When you click Print Receipt, a parameter editor interface will be displayed, and this is where you can select which receipt you want to print. Notice that the journal type has already been defaulted for you. Because we're using the cash receipt journal type, the parameter editor is already programmed for cash receipt. We will need to select the journal number that we want to print. We could print one or more journal numbers at this time. I'm going to click on the Assist button. And here are all of the journals that have been entered into this particular system. Notice you can print any one that you want, or you can print several. I know that I am the only person posting into this business unit because it is a demonstration business unit. And so I know that I can go to the last journal that was entered using the last scroll down button. And then I will click OK. There are other ways that we can limit our search for the receipt that we want to print out, but we're just going to go ahead and use just the journal number. And I'm going to click OK. And here is our receipt. Notice received from Janalee Shaw, and also down on the lower part the same information is available. So you can print this out and you can cut off the top part and hand it to me, and then I can take it away as my receipt. For some reason this particular receipt shows a combination of English and Spanish, but that probably won't happen at your site. It just depends on how the particular receipt has been set up, and this one has apparently undergoing some language confusion. So I can print this out, I can tear off the part, hand it to the person that paid in the donation, and then I can file the bottom portion of the receipt with my journal. So that is how cash receipt ledger entry works. As I have said before, ledger entry into other journal types will be a very similar process. The screen may look slightly different, but the basic steps will be exactly the same. When I'm finished with ledger entry, I can simply click the exit button to leave the screen.